Well, thank you for the invitation. It's been a great forum. I've learned a lot today, and just really top-notch discussions. So I'm pleased to be leading a really distinguished panel that's going to come up in a few minutes. But I was asked to spend a few minutes setting the framework for this last panel, which is about the broader supply chain. So and its relationship to the ports. We've talked a lot this morning about what happens inside of the gates of the port, some of the challenges, some of the opportunities from coordinating among the port operators and tenants. And now we want to talk a little bit about what happens both before goods get to the port and outside of the gates. So I want to sort of touch upon three things really briefly before the panel comes up. The first is sort of what matters to the people who move goods. The shippers, the beneficial cargo owners, because in many ways they help dictate the actions of the people who move the goods to them. Second, I want to highlight a little bit of what happened in 2014 from a supply chain perspective, because we've talked a lot about it this morning, but I think it's a good setup for the discussion that we're going to have. And then finally, there was some mention this morning about the governor's executive order. And I'm going to use that as a framework to start the discussion with the panel because, in fact, this is a forum about policy and public affairs. And it's good to sort of look at a key piece of policy that is driving activity for supply chain actors. So the first thing is what actually matters to supply chain operators these days. Coming out of the recession, a lot of people were talking about going lean, doing more with less. But in reality, supply chains can't survive if they're only lean. They have to be agile. They have to be responsive to changing demands, to changing pressure points, cost structures. And that depends upon a number of factors, right? It's very hard to read this from the side to make sure I know what I put up there. It includes not only the appropriate trade lanes. There is some flexibility there. There was mention of the Panama Canal this morning being one alternative, but there's also the Suez Canal. The shippers have alternatives, and as activity moves further west in Asia in search, in some cases for lower cost labor, alternative routes from Asia to northern Europe and the east coast of North America are more viable via Suez in some ways than Panama. That's a challenge for local stakeholders. Getting the exact cost of moving goods right. It's not just the cost of transportation, it's all of the related costs. Supply chain managers talk about the total landed cost or the total cost of operation, which is all of the different pieces of the supply chain added. Including the costs of regulatory measures and uncertainty and unpredictability, right? And talent access is a big deal. It's not just about lowest labor cost, it's about the right people to do the right jobs. So I'm really pleased to see the high schoolers in here this morning. You're in the right place, and this is a great industry to be a part of. The recently released draft National Freight Strategic Plan indicates that there are 3.1 million jobs that are the result of moving goods in this country or supporting the movement of goods at all levels, right? So all of these things matter to shippers in getting that balance right? One of the things that really hasn't been discussed today, though, but that is critical, is the challenge of the last mile. We can get goods into the ports, and very often we talk about the ports and congestion at the ports as the bottleneck. But very often the challenge is lack of loading space or parking space for trucks that takes into account the various needs of revitalized urban cores. One of the goals I know of many of the policies that we've been talking about is reducing the number of truck trips. But in fact, the way that we live these days, fresh foods, fresh flowers, all of those things that are part and parcel of our daily life that we expect actually increase the number of truck trips to our urban centers. They may be smaller vehicles, but there may be more of them. That's a challenge to an efficient supply chain as well, and getting that piece of the puzzle right also matters to shippers. And then, of course, there's on the regulatory side is how does policy keep up with changing technology, as in the case of drones, right? If drones are going to be part of serving the last mile to the store or to our house, how do we make sure that the impacts of the various movements are mitigated so as not to hinder or impact negatively the quality of life? What customers want matters to shippers. All of us in the room who shop, who buy things, have a tremendous impact on the supply chain. We buy a lot, perhaps, on Amazon, but in fact, the research suggests that there is a demand for all kinds of shopping and retail experiences, right? We talk about a world of omnichannel retail and distribution, where it's not just delivery to the store or delivery to our home. Sometimes it's going to a store, as in this case, looking at a sample and then making a purchase through a smartphone to be picked up at the store at our home. This is actually from a company called Hointer, which is a technology company. It's not even a retail company. They've got, I believe, 2 outlets, one in Seattle, one in the Bay Area in Palo Alto. And their model is you come in, and they've got one of whatever they sell. And you use your smartphone to identify the color, the size, and once you've made an identification of your choice, robotics may bring that item into a dressing room at the store for you to try on. If they don't have it, you can arrange to pick it up there or at your home. But we buy things on our mobile phones, we buy things online, we buy things in the store, and getting that mix right also has an impact on the supply chain, how goods are delivered, when they're delivered, in what form, and all of that is complicating things for supply chain managers. Right? So a couple of comments about what happened in 2014, and I don't need to dwell upon this because a lot of it was touched upon this morning. But we did sort of we saw some economic recovery occurring, which you heard in the second panel. We saw a healthy peak season. I know there was some discussion today that things may have flattened out this past year, but between 2013 and 2014, there was a healthy peak season, generally a healthy recovery. And this works in combination with my prior comment about changing behavior of consumers, complicating things. Predicting peak season gets increasingly difficult as during the holiday season we purchase gift cards, for example. The translation of a gift card into an actual purchase of a good in a store may interrupt what we viewed as a traditional peak season, that you plan for all of the goods to be purchased prior to the end of the new year. That complicates things as well. Let's see. There was mention of alliances, the formation of partnerships among ocean carriers to take advantage of economies of scale from larger vessels, but you have to fill those ships. That was also wreaking havoc with our local supply chains and ports. You have more goods being discharged at one time, creating peak demand for labor, for equipment like chassis. And the arrangements mean in some cases that there's less coordination on the vessel planning and stowage on the other side of the ocean, so that it's less coordinated when it gets to our shores, which creates more difficulties in planning on how you unload them. And we heard about some of the solutions this morning, the free flow as an example, and one way to try to address those concerns. Right. The chassis issue was mentioned more than I thought it would be. It's funny when you go and people are spending hours talking about chassis, and your friends and family can hardly believe it. But in fact, it is and I research it. I mean, I actually spend days and months thinking about chassis. But these are significant challenges. The students were asking earlier about the role of chassis. The chassis make possible, in many ways, intermodal transport. Without that piece of equipment, you can't move goods efficiently from the ocean vessel to the truck, to rail yards, and out the gates. And the number of vessels of 13,000 TEU plus complicates that and creates challenges in supplying demand at peak periods. Right? And then there was the challenge of trucking capacity. And the last two questions from Eric Garcia suggested that this is an issue, and we have a panelist who can talk about the challenges of truck capacity, both before and after the Clean Truck program, and what keeps drivers in operation and wanting to stay engaged as parts of the supply chain, and what challenges there are to keeping them. Let's see. What was the... okay, right. And then the last point is that we face challenges, but supply chain issues last year were not limited to Southern California. The supply chain can be disrupted by any number of factors. It is not only a question of congestion, larger vessels. Sometimes it's a function of weather. And so the East Coast supply chain was dealing with that in 2014, with goods from New York and New Jersey being diverted to places like Savannah and Charleston, not because of labor issues, which we've talked a lot about here, but simply because of weather. And then we had trucker strike in Vancouver, which is also part of the West Coast of North America string, and then the larger vessels being part of a broader supply chain challenge. Okay.